Robert E. Howard, for those unfamiliar, was born in 1906 in the very heart of Texas. He was, without question, the greatest pulp writer the world has ever seen. Regarded as the father of sword and sorcery, he created Conan the Cimmerian, Cull of Atlantis, Solomon Kane, Dark Agnes, El Borak, and near countless others. Howard wrote with fire. He was a master of kinetic wordplay, of mood, tone, and setting. His characters were alive, visceral, and filled with a ferocious energy unmatched by his peers and not by anyone since. Two of my favorite Robert E. Howard creations are his occult detectives Professor John Kirowan and John Conrad. While they are often called Conrad and Kirowan stories, it was Kirowan who always held my attention. Howard described him elegantly. He sat in his customary position, chin resting on his strong, slim hands. His white face was immobile, but his dark eyes gleamed with interest. Evocative of Holmes and Watson, Kirowan and Conrad were shown to be close friends, but more importantly, occult investigators who engaged Lovecraftian horrors, both as scholars and as men of action when the need arose. They appeared together in 5 tales: The Children of the Night, published in 1931, The Haunter of the Ring, published in 1934, Dig Me No Grave, published in 1937, The House in the Oaks, completed by August Derleth and published in 1971, Dagon Manor, completed by C.J. Henderson and published in 1986, and The Jade God, a fragment, published in 1992. Kirowan also appeared in the story Dermod's Bane, published in 1967, and I would argue is the narrator of Howard's classic mythos tale, The Black Stone, published in 1931, and The Thing on the Roof, published in 1932. Conrad turns up in The Dwellers Under the Tombs, published in 1976. Adapted for comics, the Kirowan and Conrad adventure Dig Me No Grave was notably recounted by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane in Marvel's Journey into Mystery No. 1, published in 1972. Kirowan and Conrad have also appeared in Robert E. Howard's Savage Sword, published by Dark Horse, in The Savage Sword of Conan, published by Titan Comics, and is a part of The Battle of the Black Stone. Robert E. Howard was right at home conjuring up tales of psychological and cosmic horror. His compelling and poetic narrative style vividly gave birth to ancient civilizations steeped in evil, arcane knowledge, and dark grimoires, and the enduring conflict between mankind and preternatural forces. While we find John Conrad as the intrepid adventurer and occult enthusiast, it is John Kirowan who is the expert in matters of esoterica. Often it is Conrad who comes to Kirowan seeking knowledge and advice, as Kirowan has already plumbed the depths of the occult, having many years before studied black magic in Budapest at the feet of a diabolical sorcerer named Vorlok. Kirowan was sickened by what he had learned and turned his back on these pursuits into the dark arts at great personal loss. And that is what makes these occult detective tales really stand out. Howard infused Kirowan in particular with a tragic backstory that makes each confrontation with arcane sorceries deeply personal and engaging. The Cimmerian September, the reading event created by Michael K. Vaughan to celebrate the works of Robert E. Howard. I invite you to submerge yourself in these thrilling tales of occult fiction. The stories of Kirowan and Conrad await. The first Kirowan and Conrad story appeared in the April-May edition of Weird Tales in 1931, and Howard was paid a goodly sum, $60, or roughly $1,200 when adjusted for inflation. Children of the Night is a compelling yet unsettling short story that weaves itself into the broader tapestry of Lovecraft's mythos, a testament to Howard's admiration for the author and his evocative cosmic horror tales. The story explores themes of racial memory and reincarnation, concepts that Howard approaches with his characteristic visceral prose and vivid imagery, with his characters delving into discussions of ancient and forbidden lore. And a curious artifact, a primeval hammer that hints at a predestined ancestral link to ancient horrors, aligning with Howard's fascination with primal forces that lurk beneath the veneer of civilization. The story begins with 6 men in scholarly discussion in the study of occult adventurer John Conrad. In his company are the story's narrator, John O'Donnell, Professor John Kirowan, and 3 men whose first names are not given, but I presume they too are all named John: Clements, Taverell, and Kettrick. O'Donnell describes them all as being of British descent and having the appearance to match, all save Kettrick, who, despite possessing a documented Welsh lineage, appears to have slightly Mongolian-looking eyes and an odd lisp. It's impossible to ignore the racial undertones present throughout the narrative. Howard's portrayal, however, reflects the views of his era, and while this colors the story with a subtext that some might find uncomfortable, the mythic grandeur displaces any such misgivings. From a craft perspective, Children of the Night is a good, though somewhat abrupt example of Howard's storytelling. His prose is undeniably evocative, raw, visceral, and intensely atmospheric. He deftly takes us from the confines of a posh scholarly study and into the primordial savagery of mythic Britain, then back again. Howard is a master of conjuring a scene and planting the vivid imagery directly into your imagination. You see and feel everything. Robert E. Howard's writing is commanding. His ability to evoke visceral reactions remains undeniable. Still, as a complete piece, Children of the Night doesn't quite reach the heights of Howard's best work, but it lays the groundwork for stories yet to come. One of Howard's most reprinted stories, The Black Stone, originally appeared in the November edition of Weird Tales in 1931, and Howard earned $65 for the story, or roughly $1,300 when adjusted for inflation. Here's where things get a little dicey, and we enter into a time-honored debate over the identity of the Blackstone's narrator. As I have included it in my reading of the Kirowan and Conrad tales, I think you know where my allegiance lies. While the narrator is unnamed, coming on the heels of Children of the Night and considering the stories written in the period, I think there is little doubt that Professor John Kirowan is our man. I consider the Black Stone, without question, a part of the Kirowan and Conrad compendium. That said, if you disagree, it's your right to do so. But with me, Kirowan stands as the man who, after discovering an obscure reference in von Juntz's Nameless Cults, travels to the village of Strgovikar in Hungary to examine this arcane obelisk, octagonal in shape, some 16 feet in height and about 1.5 feet thick. Here, Kirowan, realizing it is midsummer night, camps out at the stone and, falling asleep, dreams of pagan dancers, child sacrifices, and Clark Ashton Smith's toad god, Sathagua. But this was no dream, but the ghosts of the ancient past. This is Howard clearly aping Lovecraft's style, and even S.T. Joshi calls it the best mythos tale not written by Lovecraft himself. That said, it is also Howard to the core. His fiery prose is evident throughout as his distinctive narrative and descriptive talents are at the fore. This is a brilliant story, bordering on folk horror and reminiscent of both Macon and Blackwood as well as Lovecraft. I saw its bloated, repulsive, and unstable outline against the moonlight and set in what would have been the face of natural creature, its huge, blinking eyes, which reflected all the lust, abysmal greed, obscene cruelty, and monstrous evil that has stalked the sons of men since their ancestors moved blind and hairless in the treetops. In those grisly eyes were mirrored all of the unholy things and vile secrets that sleep in the cities under the sea, and that skulk from the light of the day in blackness of primordial caverns. And so that ghastly thing that the unhallowed ritual of cruelty and sadism and blood had evoked from in the silence of the hills, leered and blinked down on its bestial worshippers, who groveled in abhorrent abasement before it. A fitting addition to Lovecraft's mythos, and a terrific occult detective yarn, different from Howard's usual man-of-action prose, but still vibrant and descriptive as one expects from a story from Howard's Underwood. In both The Children of the Night and The Black Stone, we see reference to Smith's Sathugua and, more importantly, Van Nutz's nameless cults. Perhaps, more importantly still, we see Robert E. Howard carving out his own little corner of the mythos universe. Sold for $40 to Weird Tales and published in the February issue in 1932, The Thing on the Roof was one of Howard's favorites and a first-rate mythos tale. In a letter to a close friend, he stated, "This story is by far the best thing I have ever written, and one which I am really inclined to believe approaches real literature, distantly at least." Here we enter into another of those debated topics as to the identity of the story's anonymous narrator. But, like The Black Stone, I think it is clearly, once again, our good friend Professor John Kirowan. And like the previous two stories we have had the pleasure to consume, Clark Ashton Smith's Sathugua appears as well. Clearly, both man and beast were on Howard's mind. The story is engrossing. An unnamed London scholar, whom I name as Kirowan, is contacted by an academic rival, a man named Tussman, who seeks the professor's help in procuring an original copy of von Yutz's nameless cults. The original version of the arcane work reveals the location of the Temple of the Toad God in Honduras, wherein Tussman gains possession of a toad-shaped jewel. Upon his return, he invites Kirowan to his mansion to see the fruits of his discovery, but having failed to heed von Yutz's warnings, Tussman meets his doom, the only clue, that of a hoofprint left by a vengeful god. This is an atmospheric masterpiece from Howard that was adapted by Marvel Comics in Chamber of Chills #3 by Roy Thomas and Frank Brunner in a standout horror tale from 1972. It was again adapted 40 years later by Dark Horse Comics in Robert E. Howard's Savage Sword #4, written by David Lamb and illustrated by M.S. Corley. An open window. Behind the veil, what gulfs of time and space. What blinking, mowing shapes to blast the sight. I shrink before a vague, colossal face, born in the mad immensities of night. The Haunter of the Ring was published in the June 1934 issue of Weird Tales. Robert E. Howard was paid $60 for the story. While we get a fascinating glimpse into John Kirowan's backstory, it is the ring itself that captures the attention of most fans, for it is a relic from Conan of Cimmeria's Hyborian age. It is the ring of Thoth Amon. In this evocative tale, we are introduced to James and Evelyn Gordon. Mrs. Gordon has attempted to murder her newlywed husband, but has no memory of her prospective matricide. James believes reincarnation is the culprit, but Professor John Kirowan suspects that the gift Evelyn received as a peace offering from a spurned lover, a Mr. Joseph Rolock, is the more likely candidate. The ring is described as a copper ring made like a scaly snake coiled 3 times, with its tail in its mouth and yellow jewels for eyes. After another attempt on Gordon's life, Kirowan confronts Rolock, only to learn that Evelyn's former paramour is none other than the professor's old enemy, Yosef of Rolock. Kirowan is able to identify the ring as the ancient and accursed ring of Thoth-Amon handed down by foul cults of sorcerers since the days of forgotten Stygia. Rolock used black magic to summon a black elemental spirit to possess Evelyn and compelling her to kill her husband. Kirowan thwarts the sorcerer's plan by revealing that Rolock's payment to the spirit, that of James and Evelyn's soul, is forfeit, for Vorlock lacks the authority to transfer possession, and thus the spirit takes Rolock's soul instead. I quite like this one. Having come to Howard via Conan, having a link between that ancient Hyborian age and the modern world of John Kirowan had some much-needed spice. Howard is a little more subdued here, but it works quite well. After all, he is still Howard, and the vivid descriptions and heady atmosphere are more than worth the price of admission. While it has been reprinted many times, the story is not highly regarded, which is criminal in my opinion. This lays the groundwork for even more tales to come, bringing John Kirowan even more to life and establishing some much-needed world building. It also, while remaining firmly a mythos tale, shows Howard taking more agency, carving out a more impressive corner of Lovecraft's weird landscape for himself. Robert E. Howard walked out to his 1935 Chevrolet, and from the glove box retrieved a gun he'd borrowed from his friend, Lindsay Tyson. He rolled up the car windows and, with deliberation, shot himself in the head. He was just 30 years old. His mother, who had been in a coma for several days, passed the next day. Howard's father, desperate for money, scoured his son's room for finished stories he could sell to the pulps. 8 months after his death, Robert E. Howard's Kirowan and Conrad tale, Dig Me No Grave, appeared in the February 1937 issue of Weird Tales. Dr. Howard was paid $100, or roughly $2,200 when adjusted for inflation. This was the first Kirowan story I read, adapted for Journey into Mystery Volume 2 by Roy Thomas with Gil Kane and Tom Palmer on art in 1972. It stuck with me. Dig Me No Grave begins with John Conrad rousing Professor John Kirowan from sleep. Their mutual acquaintance, John Gremlin, known for a decadent lifestyle and interest in the occult, has died. Gremlin left behind instructions for Conrad to perform an arcane ritual over his corpse. Despite his reservations, Conrad enlists Kirowan's help to carry out these final wishes. Gremlin's body is to be placed on an ebony table, surrounded by black candles with a mysterious parchment read over it at dawn. However, when Kirowan and Conrad arrive at Gremlin's estate, they find the body already prepared, despite it having been left unattended. A mysterious figure enters, an Oriental man, with knowledge of occult practices. It is he who initiated the ritual and who now takes part. Conrad reads the spell and the candles are extinguished, one by one, plunging the room into darkness. Both Gremlin's body and the Oriental man disappear, and Kirowan and Conrad flee the house in terror as it is engulfed in flames, a monstrous shadow rising above the inferno. This is a very suspenseful tale, full of Howard's patented atmosphere, and one I quite enjoyed, both as a kid reading the comic and as a young adult when I first read Howard's prose story. All these decades later, I'm still quite fond of it, though I wonder if it could have done with another polish. The Faustian bargain and Lovecraftian mythos don't mesh as well as I would like, but ultimately, Howard's kinetic storytelling wins the day, regardless. A powerful tale that leaves you wanting more, But alas, little more remains, and Howard's death sees these stalwart occult detectives left largely to our imaginations. Story rejected in 1929, Dermod's Bane sat forgotten in a trunk until it was found by Glenn Lord in 1964. It was then published, some 3 years later, in the 17th issue of Magazine of Horror. Dermod's Bane is another tale with an unnamed narrator, though we do know he was descended from the Kirowan line. Due to the nature of the story and other tidbits, I've always taken it to be a John Kirowan yarn. Your mileage may vary. Regardless, I count it as such. Professor Kirowan is found to be grieving the death of his twin sister, Moira. Feeling as though a part of him has died with her, he travels to Galway, Ireland, the land of their ancestors, to find solace. In Galway, Kirowan meets up with distant relatives and reconnects with his Irish heritage. Here, the legend of Dermod O'Connor is recounted. Known as the Wolf, Dermod was a notorious slayer of men who met his end at the hands of Kirowan's ancestor, Sir Michael. Later, Kirowan wanders into the hills and encounters the ghost of Dermod O'Connor near the tree where Dermod was executed. The specter first wears the form of Kirowan's twin sister, luring him to the edge of a cliff. Then, as Kirowan is about to lose his life, Dermod transformed with blood and tusks, revealing his true identity. Kirowan is saved at the last minute by the ghost of his sister, and he grieves for her, at last finding peace. While not my favorite Howard story, this one has a ring of authenticity to it. In a way, I think Howard was trying to work through his own grief and depression. It is certainly a worthy tale, and one terrifically adapted by Roy Thomas and Kelly Jones for Cross-Plane Comics' Mythmaker in 1999. Included in the horror stories of Robert E. Howard is a fragment titled The House. Written sometime in the early 1930s, it is a deliciously atmospheric Kirowan and Conrad tale, even though the character of Conrad is named James in the piece. The simple fact is, this is a first and unfinished draft. I suspect it may predate the Children of the Night, or perhaps James as opposed to John was a typo. Regardless, it is clearly John Conrad in the story. August Derleth finished the draft, publishing it as The House in the Oaks in the anthology Dark Things in 1971. Derleth's ending was disappointing. While Howard had built a terrific foundation, adding depth to the mad poet of Lovecraftian lore, Justin Joffrey, and establishing a sense of cosmic dread amidst gothic imagery, Derleth's handling of the characters, particularly Conrad, was unfortunate. Another interesting fragment from a historical perspective is one titled Dagon Manor. This is an obvious early draft of the Children of the Night. All the players are there. It's Howard at his atmospheric best. Another fragment with a lot of potential was an unnamed Kirowan and Conrad piece called The Jade God by Glenn Lord. Fu Manchu even gets name dropped in this one and is a great start to a spectacular Weird Menace yarn. Now, in 1976, we saw the publication of a Conrad and O'Donnell tale, Dwellers Under the Tombs, in Lost Fantasies number 4. Howard had shopped this story around, but it went unsold in his lifetime. It's a grand Lovecraftian tale dealing with ancient tombs and lost races, all things Howard was enamored with, and it's surprising this never made it into Weird Tales, as it resides easily alongside his best horror yarns. And that's all of Howard's penned Kirowan and Conrad stories, finished and unfinished alike. Luckily for us, the characters have been kept alive in the world of Four Colors. We'll talk about some of those in the Cimmerian September finale next week. Until then, if you need me, I'll be in the shadows. We've already looked at comic adaptations by Marvel, Cross Planes, and Dark Horse, but there have been some interesting original works featuring Kirowan and Conrad, beginning with Dark Horse's Lovecraftian-infused two-parter, A Book and Its Cover in 2014, which was fun and decently penned by Paul Tobin. It has been Titan that has properly revitalized the characters. Jeff Shanks gave us a terrific tale, Horror from the Tomb, utilizing his keen knowledge of archaeology to propel the yarn. The art by Eric Donovan leans a bit manga, but has loads of kinetic energy. This leads us to Jim Zub and Jonas Sharp's Battle of the Black Stone, which utilizes one of Howard's best horror tales to bring together a bevy of his creations for an epic event. This was a bit messy, but Kirowan and Conrad really shine in this tale. Which brings us to the event in 2025, Scourge of the Serpent, from Zub and artist Ivan Gill. Using the framing device of Robert E. Howard's classic Kirowan yarn, The Haunter of the Ring, a story with deep ties to the Hyborian Age, Zub once again brings together a cadre of Howard heroes to confront the menace of Stygian sorcery across time. The Kirowan parts look amazing, and Zub has a good handle on the character. I look forward to seeing how it plays out. My hope is that this inspires more Kirowan in the future. I think he is a character that could drive his own corner of the universe in comics, books, and, dare I say it, a series or movie. All the elements are there, just waiting to be properly championed. All I know is, if it happens, I would love to be a part of it. So if Titan or Heroic Signatures are listening, I'm your guy. Let's make some magic.